All right, let's dive in. Today, we're going to unpack this really fascinating academic paper that puts forward a radical idea. What if AI isn't just another new tool? What if it's a revolution on the scale of language itself? Seriously, we're going to try and look past all of the hype and get to the core of how AI could be this fundamental turning point in human history. So, you've probably heard people talk about AI as just another tool, right? Like a better hammer or a super smart spreadsheet. But what if that whole comparison just completely misses the point? What if we're dealing with something that doesn't just help us do stuff, but actually fundamentally changes how we think? So to get our heads around that massive question, here's the roadmap for this explainer. We'll kick things off with this idea of a new kind of mind. Then we'll define a really key term, cognology. From there, we'll look back at humanity's other big cognitive tools, check out what's driving this change, and then jump into that big debate. Is AI a parrot or a real problem solver? And we'll wrap up by looking at what this all means for our future. All right, first up, a new kind of mind. So here it is, the central idea from the paper. It says AI isn't just a better tool. Nope, it's what they call a fourth cognology, a revolution that's on the same scale as language or the printing press. I mean, think about that. That is a huge claim. So we've got to break down what on earth that actually means. And to do that, we first have to get a handle on that key term. So what is a cognology?
Okay, so a cognology is a really rare kind of technology. It's something that processes information outside of our own brains. And for something to count as a cognology, it has to tick 3 boxes. First, it has to make information portable, detaching it from a specific person or place. Second, it's got to help us coordinate in much bigger groups. And third, and this is the big one, it has to fundamentally change our cognitive architecture. Basically, it changes how we, as a society, actually think and solve problems.
And this right here is the absolute key difference. Think about a clay tablet or a printed book. The paper calls these passive substrates. They're amazing, right? They hold our thoughts, they transmit them, but they don't change. They don't talk back. AI, though, that's what they call an active substrate. It's not just a container for information. It actually participates in the process of thinking. It can synthesize ideas, it can critique them, it can even come up with new ones all on its own. Okay, so to really appreciate just how big of a deal this is, let's zoom out and look at the history here. How does AI stack up against the other game-changing tools our species has come up with? When you lay it all out like this, you can see this incredible pattern emerge, right? First, you have language. It solved our biggest problem, isolation. We could finally share complex thoughts, but it was temporary. You say it, and it's gone. So then comes writing, which solves that problem of volatility, making our ideas permanent. But writing by hand is slow. So then, boom, you get the printing press. It solves the problem of scalability and speed. Ideas can now spread like wildfire. You see how each one builds on the last? Well, the paper argues that AI is the next step, here to solve our biggest problem, just the sheer overwhelming complexity of the modern world. And look at that last column. It is the very first active tool on this list that isn't another human. So what actually happened under the hood to make this possible? What was the big technical leap that turned AI into this new active thing? Well, it all comes down to a fundamental shift in how we build these systems. For the longest time, what we called AI, the good old-fashioned kind, was all about rules. Programmers would sit down and try to hand code a rule for literally every single possibility. And as you can imagine, these systems were super brittle. The second they saw something they hadn't been explicitly programmed for in the messy real world, they just fell apart. The real game changer was what we have now, connectionist AI. Instead of feeding it rules, we just feed it a mountain of data and it learns the patterns itself. This makes it way more robust and flexible, and it can handle messy, ambiguous stuff a lot more like how our own brains seem to work. All right, let's tackle the elephant in the room. This is probably the biggest, most common objection to this whole idea. Is AI really thinking, or is it just a really, really good mimic? You've probably heard the critique, right? The argument is that these models are just stochastic parrots. It's a great phrase. It basically means they're just statistically predicting the next word in a sentence based on all the text they've been trained on. There's no real understanding, no grounding in meaning. And hey, if that's true, then they can't be a real cognitive partner, can they? They're just a fancy mirror reflecting our own words back at us. But the paper has a really interesting comeback to that. It argues that agency, the ability to do things, isn't some magical all-or-nothing property. It's something you can build. It's an engineered quality. So you start with that base model, the quote-unquote parrot. Then you start adding layers. You give it a memory loop so it can remember past conversations. You connect it to tools so it can actually take action in the world. And this is the really important part. You add a self-critique loop so it can reflect on its own work and correct its mistakes. And what you end up with is something that's way more than just a mimic. It's an active, problem-solving agent.
Okay, so let's just say we run with this for a minute. If this theory is right, and AI really is the fourth cognology, what does that actually mean for our future? And, more importantly, how could we ever know if this big idea is actually true?
And what's so cool about this is that it's not just some philosophical hand-waving. The paper lays out a testable, scientific hypothesis. So what should we be looking for? Well, the theory gets stronger if we see things like AIs getting way more capable when we give them feedback loops, or if organizations that use AI start getting way better at forecasting and planning. On the flip side, the theory gets weaker if AI just stays brittle and unreliable no matter what we add to it, or if it fails to give anyone a real-world advantage in coordinating things. These are the signs we can actually watch for in the real world. And this leads to a pretty mind-bending implication. See, for all of human history, we've had two ways of passing knowledge down through generations. There's our genetics, which is super slow, and then there's culture, language, books, traditions, which is much faster. Well, this paper suggests AI could be creating a third system, algorithmic inheritance. Just try to imagine a world where one AI agent learns a new skill, a really complex one, and that skill can then be perfectly copied and deployed to every other AI on the planet almost instantly. That's not just an improvement, that's a fundamental change to the engine of human progress itself. So that's where this leaves us. We're left with this one final, absolutely massive question. Think about it. Every single one of the previous cognologies totally remade the world. Language gave us communities and tribes. Writing gave us sprawling empires. The printing press gave us modern science and the world we live in today. So, if this theory is right, if we really are at the dawn of a new era with an active cognitive partner, what kind of world is that going to build? That's the incredible question that this whole idea of a fourth cognology forces us to ask.